it appeared to have played a couple of sentences on page 29, which was, well, Ron's given us details that he said you told him of the inside of the apartment. Mr. Smith, he's lying. That was I think, the best I could do, the only one that I heard, and again, I apologize if that was not part of what had been eventually excluded or not, but my notes still have included that as being excluded, and we do believe we did hear that.
Right. I noted that as well, and yes, it was something that I indicated would be excluded. Mr. Waller?
That's right.
All right.
I think the page flipped over and it was too late.
I can do one of two things. I can call it to the jury's attention and ask them to strike it and strike it, or I can just note your exception and move on.
Well, my suggestion, which I have not discussed with my co-counsel, is you could, another alternative would be to just, before they start listening again, give the general instruction that you gave previously about the fact that nothing that's included in the questions is being offered for the truth of the matter asserted, but not make any specific reference to any particular section of what they've heard, but in that way at least give them a reminder of that sort of general premise.
Right, and I certainly had intended to give that instruction again at the very end. I'm happy to do it now.
I think if you do it at the very end, I think we'll note our exception, and if you do it at the very, I think announcing, hey, they had this statement again, ignore it, I don't think would be beneficial.
Right.
To it. I think the general instructions, and I think giving it, because I think my anticipation is we have only a very few more minutes, so it just seems to make sense to do it at the very end. The instruction, which I know was the court's original.
Right. I'll give the same limiting instruction again then at the very end of the publication of this exhibit. All right. Anything else? Very good. Let's bring jurors in, please. As I understand it, Ms. Shakita, you're going to play an excerpt that was inadvertently skipped, then you're going to fast forward to where we left off previously.
There are actually two small excerpts that were in between them, and I apologize for skipping over them. And then there is one short one that's after the 4:50 time frame, but each one of them is very short.
All right, go ahead, please.
And so starting with 3:54:17.
Yeah, it was about shoes. You okay? Yeah, it was about shoes. I had shoes on. You had no shoes on? Yeah, I had shoes on because he had on the boots. He put the green, the track things, those things on. He put those on. Because I wasn't going to wear mine. He didn't put my shoes on until that. What about those jeans? Is there any clothes you're wearing now that y'all were wearing that you were wearing that night? No? Because he's saying that shirt you were wearing that night. No, this shirt was in his mother's car. That's in his mother's car? Okay. What about your short sleeve? It was. I know I didn't have this one because I didn't get this until the next morning until the mama came and took us away for us. So I think it was a thermal, if I'm not mistaken. Okay. All right. Is that good enough for water, man? Yeah, appreciate it. All right, you're welcome.
Stopping at 355.27. Starting 431.08.
You alright, man? You don't have to jump. You okay? Yeah, I was tired. I know, man. We're getting ready to bounce up out of here. What this is just a DNA. Oh, no, they did it last year. What? They did DNA last year. Okay, I know, but we have to do it too. You alright with that? Good? Alright. You asked for a drink and that's all you drank? I know, but I went to sleep. Cold. But you've been up in here for a while. Can't believe you're not there. I ain't gonna sleep this morning until like 5:30. So you're familiar? You've had this done before? You know it's just gonna be one side, right? Yeah, it's like the strip of my jaw, right? Yeah. Can you just open your mouth? Just do one side. All right. Are you okay for now? Just tired. I know you are, man. We're gonna roll out of here in a few minutes. Just knock on the door if you need to use the bathroom or anything. All right? All right. I won't be going to sit up in here anymore, so lay your head down. Go ahead.
Stopping 433.03. Starting 551.14.
Hey, Trina. We're just gonna do one more thing and we're about to leave. He's gonna take pictures of everybody. So, you alright? Alright, you stand up over there, please. I still can't believe you didn't drink any of that water. I'm tired. Oh, I hear you. That was cold. Yeah, it was cold.
All right, so ladies and gentlemen, I'll remind you again that the questions and the information recounted within the questions is not being received for the truth of what is being recounted, but is solely for the purposes of putting the responses of the defendant and the interrogation methods employed by the detective in context. You must not consider the questions for the truth of what is being recounted in those questions. Further questions, Ms. Shakita, for Mr. Gibney?
I wanted to ask you a couple of questions about the interview itself, Detective Gibney. You had talked earlier in your testimony that you were going back and forth and speaking with people. Was that sort of the breaks that we saw in the interview?
Yes, ma'am.
And that last portion that we played, I believe, was about 5:51:30 into the interview, so almost 6 hours into the time he was there.
Yes, ma'am.
You had talked about the water bottle. Had he asked for water?
I don't believe he did.
Okay. And did you allow him, for example, to go to the restroom if he needed to do that?
Yes.
He had talked somewhat about smoking a cigarette. Did you try and see if you could find one for him?
I believe he was able to smoke cigarette at some point.
And that one of the very last sections, when you come back into the doorway, I think you said something like, "Do you need me to holler at you or something?" Why did you go back in the room?
While we were sitting down, we, meaning myself and the other detectives on my team, discussing future strategies, I was told by the officer that that Mr. Smith wanted to speak with me.
And at the end, he asked if he can get his shoes back. Did you allow him to have the shoes back?
No, ma'am.
There was a lot of conversation early on with the computer and a fiend. What is a fiend?
A fiend is a street term for a drug abuser. You may hear the term crackhead, but those are basically slang terms for somebody who's abusing narcotics.
There is a period of time on there where he talks about walking from Six Forks to Capitol Boulevard. Do you know approximately how far that is?
It's approximately 5 miles.
And there are some times on there where he makes some comments about being Pyru. What is that?
Objection.
Overruled.
Pyru is a subset.
Objection. Just put on the grounds 41424 due process.
Overruled.
What is, I'm sorry?
Pyru is a subset of a blood gang member.
And during the time he was on there, that he indicated that both he and Mr. Anthony were members of that gang.
Yes, ma'am.
Objection. For the grounds cases.
Overruled.
Can I approach the witness, Judge?
Yes.
I'm going to show you 3 photographs, the first of which I've marked as State's Exhibit 77 and ask if you recognize that.
Yes, ma'am.
And what is State's Exhibit 77 a photograph of?
This is a photograph of the area along the chain link fence that Mr. Smith indicated he had jumped over and was squatting down. This is a view taken from the east side of it, showing Miss Huggins-Jones' apartment in the background.
And looking at State's Exhibit 4078, what is that a photograph of?
That is a close-up of that first picture. However, in this one you can clearly see a pink-colored jewelry box lying on the ground underneath some of the shrubbery.
And then looking at State's Exhibit 79, does that appear to be even more close-up of 78?
Yes, ma'am.
And you had described earlier and actually identified the box that was collected into evidence. State's Exhibits both 77, 78, and 79. Is that the condition of the area as you found it, along with the way you found the pink jewelry box?
Yes, ma'am.
And specifically looking at State's Exhibit 80, what is that?
That is a picture of the same jewelry box with a pink-colored iTunes gift card.
And once you saw this, was it your testimony that you contacted CCBI to come collect it and photograph it?
Yes, ma'am.
But is this the way that brush looked when you were there? I think it was maybe the 16th of May.
Yes, ma'am.
And looking from this, does it not only illustrate the area in that way, but also the view to 441 Allister?
Yes, ma'am, it
And
does.
would it help to illustrate your earlier testimony as well as the vantage point from the apartment to the jury?
Yes, ma'am.
Your Honor, at this time, the state would move to introduce State's Exhibits 77, 78, 79, and 80, and for illustrative purposes.
Any objection? No, sir. They're allowed for illustrative purposes.
I would ask permission to publish those via the
Yes.
projector. And may Detective Gibney stand, Judge?
Yes.
State's Exhibit 77, can you describe what the jury's seeing there?
This is the apartment building. In the background, there's two officers standing in the breezeway of Miss Huggins-Jones' apartment. This is the chain link fence, which is covered in some vines and shrubbery. And this is, if you can see, a very faint pink spot. That is the pink colored jewelry box lying underneath some of the poison ivy.
In your earlier testimony, in addition to the video that we just watched, you talked about being a big brick fence or cement fence and then the chain link. Can you describe sort of in general where the larger fences, the non-chain link fence, would have been?
Yes, ma'am. From this spot over to the right, basically just a little bit over here, all the way over to the right, is a very large wall that separates the road from the highway.
And in speaking with the defendant when you talked to him that night, was this the area that he described that he was able to jump over?
Yes, ma'am.
If you could fast forward to State's Exhibit 78, and again, can you describe what the jury's looking at here?
This is a close-up of the previous photo. That is the pink-colored Victoria's Secret jewelry box lying underneath some of the shrubbery. That is the pink-colored jewelry box lying underneath some of the shrubbery. That is the fence line, the chain link fence with the brush over it, and again, the apartment building behind in the backdrop.
Could you go back to 77, please? I want to take your attention. You had talked about the breezeway, and it's a little bit easier to see with the lights down. Can you show where that breezeway into the entrance where Miss Huggins-Jones lived?
Yes. There's two officers in blue uniforms standing in that breezeway. If you were to go straight through it and to the right would be Miss Huggins-Jones' apartment.
And so from this viewpoint, to be clear, is her apartment on the front side or on the back side?
It's on the back side.
And we had talked earlier about one entryway, she's sort of on the first ground level floor, and on the back side it's the second floor. Is that your recollection?
Yes, ma'am.
And then to 79. And then is this the close-up that you described of the jewelry box?
Yes, ma'am. It's the same jewelry box, just a closer picture of it.
And State's Exhibit 80. And what's that?
That is the same jewelry box with a pink-colored iTunes card.
And you had said earlier that you actually found this along with Detective Morse. Can you describe the way the brush was in that area?
There were some pieces of the leaves, even some of the poison ivy that appeared to have fairly recently been walked on, or it just looked disturbed.
And did you notice that it looked like there was poison ivy in this area?
Yes.
Thank you. Detective Gibney, have you had occasion to walk that area, that is the area around, the area around this fence that the jewelry box was found?
Yes, ma'am.
And how would you describe its, the lighting there in the dark? Is
it-
it well lit?
It's poorly lit. There are some lights from Six Forks Road, but generally speaking, in that specific area, it's very poorly lit.
Do you, in looking, it's kind of hard to tell from that photograph, could you estimate how far, example, from that chain link fence it is to, say, the beginning of the breezeway of the apartment building?
I would estimate 50, 55 yards.
And there's Ramblewood, is that the road that's in between there?
Yes, there's on the other side of this the chain link fence, there's a large kind of grassy area, and then Ramblewood, and then the general front of the apartment building. And her door sits on the back side of that.
Backside.
Yes, ma'am.
I don't have any further questions, Judge.
Cross-examination?
Yes, sir. Okay. Good morning, Detective Gibney.
Morning, sir.
I'm going to start out asking you some questions about some of the testimony from yesterday with it. In doing that, one of the things that I believe that you asked was for various pictures to be taken around the scene of the Allister apartments. Is that correct?
I asked, my first focus upon arrival to the crime scene was the vehicle break-ins in that sort of area. I did not focus on the actual apartment itself.
Did you at some point ask that photographs be taken of the area around the Allister apartments?
In regards to the vehicle break-ins?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Did you ever ask for that photographs be taken of the gate?
I asked that it be forensically processed, yes, sir.
Okay, and does that include taking photographs of the gate?
Typically, yes, sir.
Okay. As far as you know, there was never any pictures taken of that gate?
I was under the impression there was pictures taken of that gate. I know it was processed. It was requested to be processed.
Okay. Have you, as far as you know, you have never seen a picture of the gate?
I personally have never seen a picture of that gate, no, sir.
Okay. You collected various items from Mr. Smith, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
All right. You did not personally photograph those items?
No, sir.
That was CBI's responsibility?
I didn't request them to be photographed.
Okay. So they were not photographed as far as you know?
Not as far as I'm aware of, no, sir.
Okay. You talked about that you had spoken with Julius Bumpers?
Yes, sir.
And in doing that, that he had ID'd Ronald Anthony and Sarah Redden as the persons who sold him the computer?
The orange-colored computer, yes.
The orange-colored computer, right?
Yes, sir.
That's the one I was talking about. There were two computers, but the one that Mr. Bumpers bought was the orange-colored one?
That's correct, yes, sir.
And he identified, what? And he was able, he did not know them by name, but he was able to identify them through photographs?
Yes, sir.
All right. Let me talk a little bit about your interview with Mr. Smith. At the beginning, we saw on the videotape at the beginning that you read him his rights.
Yes, sir.
And you told him he did not have to speak with you.
Yes, sir.
But he did agree to speak with you.
Yes, sir.
And he had the right to end the interview at any time.
Yes, sir.
And he never did end the interview himself.
No, sir.
What time, do you remember what time the interview started?
It was at approximately 8 p.m.
8 p.m. And the last time you spoke with him, was that a little bit past 1 a.m.?
According to the timestamp, yes, sir.
Okay. Do you remember specifically what time that was?
It was in the early morning hours of the following day.
Okay, he was, let me just have one moment to refresh my own memory. See, this at, would about 1:54 a.m., does that sound about right?
That would be fairly accurate, yes, sir.
Okay. And during that time, we only saw maybe a little bit more of an hour of the interview because you were going in and out during that time.
Yes, sir.
With it, but he was in the room the entire time.
Yes, sir.
And one of the rules in that room, it's a county building. Was it in the sheriff's department?
No, sir. It's the city of Raleigh.
City,
building.
so city building. And one of the rules there was that there was no smoking in those rooms.
Yes.
Yes, that there is no smoking.
I'm sorry. To clarify my answer, yes, sir. There's supposed to be no smoking in those rooms.
Okay. And Mr. Smith never left the room during that time?
There were some time periods where I was not with him when I was in the other side of the office speaking with the other detectives. I know he had requested to step outside and smoke a cigarette, which is typically a request we do cater to. Whether or not he specifically did go outside and smoke a cigarette, I do not know the answer to that.
As far as you know, you personally never saw him go out and smoke
I
a cigarette?
personally never saw him go outside.
Travion is 20 years old?
At the time of that interview, yes, sir.
Okay. And you talked with him, as we talked about, for quite a while. He admitted that he sold one of those computers, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And throughout the process, he mentioned, I think at least once, maybe more, that he was worried about his son.
Yes.
And he did admit early on that he had broken into cars.
Yes, sir.
And that Ronald Anthony and Sarah Redden were with him when he was breaking into cars.
Yes, sir.
He told you he never went into the apartment.
Yes, sir.
He told you that Sarah Redden never went into the apartment.
Yes, sir.
He told you that he had talked about what had happened with his father.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
In regards to the phone call?
That he had made a phone call to his father about what had happened that night.
Yes, sir.
And you did not ask his father's name.
No, sir.
Do you know if the Raleigh Police Department was able to determine the name of his father?
I'm not aware. No, sir.
Okay. As far as you know, the Raleigh Police Department never made an attempt to interview his father to confirm the story.
I personally did not. No, sir.
Okay. And you're not aware of any other officer doing that either?
No, sir.
All right. Remember, he told you he talked some about Ronald Anthony.
Yes.
Remember him telling you that Ronald thinks he's pretty much, since he's the oldest, that he's in control of everything.
Yes, sir.
And he wants to do everything. Remember, Mr. Smith
I
found
do
out?
recall that. Yes, sir.
Yes. That's how he operates.
Yes, sir.
He said, but he likes to be in control.
Yes, sir.
That sounds familiar.
Yes, sir. That was documented.
He's older than me, and he's older than Sarah. Remember him saying that?
I do recall that from the interview. Yes, sir.
Okay. You asked for him to provide a DNA swab,
Yes, sir.
and he did that.
Yes, sir.
Didn't resist you.
No, sir.
You asked for him to provide his shoes,
Yes, sir.
and he gave you his shoes.
Yes, sir.
He, at the end of, towards the end of the interview, he talked about going to the Super 8 motel,
Yes.
and he went there with Sarah and Ronald Anthony.
Yes, sir. He originally said that Sarah went home, and then later on in the interview, they went to the hotel together. Yes, sir.
Yeah, and later in the interview, he said that all three of them were there.
Yes, sir.
I may have one moment.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. No more questions.
Redirect.
When you were asked about whether or not the defendant admitted into breaking into cars early on, and you said yes, had you, at the point where he admitted breaking into cars, was that before you left the room the first time or after you came back and had talked and said Ron and Sarah have been talking?
That was after. The first part of the interview, it is my opinion that he was trying to disassociate himself from the apartments.
Well, and in the beginning, he was telling you that he got stuff from this fiend that we've been calling it.
Yes, ma'am.
And do you recall him saying the cars and stuff, that was true after you said we've spoken with Ron and Sarah and they've given it up?
Yes, ma'am.
I don't have any further questions.
Anything further? All right, thank you, sir. You may step down.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Further evidence for the state?
There is, Your Honor. Your Honor, this time we're going to be calling Tracy Gold to the stand. She is the CCBI agent that processed the upstairs apartment. There's quite a bit of physical evidence in conjunction with her testimony that I haven't brought into the courtroom yet. If we may have 5 minutes just to bring that in here so that we didn't clutter the courtroom.
All right. So members of the jury, I'll just ask you to step in the jury deliberation room for 5 minutes. We'll be at ease for 5 minutes. Just recall my instructions. Leave your notepads in the chair, please. Let's go ahead and bring jurors, please. All right. Mr. Keene, if you'll call your next witness, please.
Your Honor, at this time the state would call Agent Tracy Gold to the stand.
Put your left hand on the Bible, raise your right, please. You solemnly swear testimony to give this court shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you, ma'am. Please be seated.
Mr. Waller?
Your Honor. Good morning, Agent Gold.
Good morning.
Will you please state your name for the record?
My name is Tracy Gold.
Miss or Agent Gold, how are you currently employed?
I'm not employed right now. I was a CCBI at the time of the incident, and I left there to go to the Metro Nashville Police Department. and a couple months ago I had to go to Florida for a family emergency.
And when you said you left CCBI, you went to another law enforcement agency?
That's correct, as a crime scene investigator.
What law enforcement agency was that?
The Metro Nashville Police Department in Nashville, Tennessee.
Well, let me back up just a little bit, and you mentioned the term CCBI. What is CCBI?
It's the City County Bureau of Identification. They're responsible for processing the crime scenes throughout the county for all the other law enforcement agencies.
And when you're a member of the CCBI, are you an agent with that agency?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Are you a sworn law enforcement officer as well?
No, we are civilian employees.
Agent Gold, if you'll tell us a little bit about your training and experience you have in regards to being a crime scene investigator.
I started in the crime scene field in 2006. I'm a certified senior crime scene analyst. I have a bachelor's degree in criminal justice, a certificate degree in crime scene technology, and approximately 1,000 hours of specialized forensic training.
What year did you actually start with CCBI?
2011.
And prior to 2011, were you involved in crime scene investigation as well?
Yes, sir. I was employed at the Charlotte County Sheriff's Office in Florida.
Is that where you're from originally?
Well, I'm originally from Baltimore, but my family all lives in Florida.
And you said you have a certification regarding being a crime scene investigator. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, sir. The IAI, which is the International Association of Identification, is an international organization, and they provide certifications, three different levels of certification for crime scene investigators. There's the first level is crime scene investigator, second is certified crime scene analyst, and then the third level is the senior crime scene analyst, and I have the third level, which requires at least 6 years of experience and a certain amount of training, and then you have to take a test and exam.
Agent Gold, can you tell us a little bit about how what you do as a CCBI agent differs from what, say, a patrol officer or even a detective with the Raleigh Police Department does?
We are responsible for the forensics, so we simply do the crime scene investigation. We don't make arrests, we don't do the interviews, we don't pull people over. We are simply responsible for the actual crime scene investigation.
You mentioned the term forensics. Can you tell us what forensics means?
Technically, the definition is the application of science to the law.
And in regards to that area, what type of evidence are you looking for when you process a scene?
We're looking mostly for physical evidence, whether that be impression evidence like shoe prints or fingerprints, DNA evidence such as body fluids, blood, any type of physical evidence in those categories.
And how does CCBI become involved with a crime scene?
The original responding agency, which in this case was the Raleigh Police Department, responds to the 911 call, and then they request CCBI to respond.
And turning your attention to May 14th, 2013 at approximately 7:30 a.m., were you on duty, duly sworn, and so employed as an agent with City County Bureau of Identification?
Yes, I was.
And were you alerted to a crime scene that morning?
Yes, I was.
Can you describe that for us, please?
How I received the call?
Yes, ma'am.
I believe my supervisor called me and advised me of the address and that there was a homicide, and so I started driving over there at that point.
You said you had a supervisor at that point. Who was that?
Mike Galloway.
And when you respond to a homicide scene, as you mentioned here, is it normal for a supervisor to respond as well?
Yes, that's policy. A supervisor will always respond to a homicide.
And did Agent Galloway respond this day as well?
Yes, he did. He was at the scene the whole day.
Agent Gold, when you arrived there, can you tell us a little bit about how you began your investigation?
The first thing I do is I meet with the lead detective. In this case, I met with Detective Brady, and he gives us the details that he has at the time, the known facts, the name. At that time, he told me that there was a search warrant, and for both the second floor and I believe the first floor at that time, there were two separate crime scenes. And he gives me those details, and that's usually the first step before we start doing any actual processing.
And let me ask you about that. When you say processing a scene, are there different steps that an agent goes through in processing a crime scene?
There are. We're responsible for the documentation and collection and the preservation of the evidence. And so after we receive information as to what has happened, we then start with our documentation, which would be photographs, video, and notes.
And let me ask you specifically about photographs, Agent Gold. When you take those photographs, has the crime scene been disturbed in any way?
I take the photographs of the crime scene exactly how it is when I see it.
And as you go through the processing of the scene, do you take other photographs that may provide more detail or elaborate on certain things that you find there?
Essentially, throughout the scene, you're always taking photographs. You usually take 3 sets. Overall photographs, which are overalls of the view, and then you'll take a mid-range, which is a closer photograph showing something in relation to something else, perhaps. And then a lot of times you'll also take close-up photographs, so you can see the detail of a fingerprint, for example.
After you photograph a scene in the manner that you've described, what is the next step in terms of processing the crime scene?
Well, first we usually do just the overall photos. The mid-range and close-ups are further into the investigation. But we did the overall photos. We also did 360 photos and videotaped it.
And after you go through the photographing the scene, videoing the scene, is that the point in which you start looking for other physical evidence as you've described already?
It is. At that point, we will start to place evidence markers down, and each marker represents an item of evidence.
I anticipate one of the terms that you will use in the course of your testimony here today will be latent evidence. Can you tell the members of the jury what latent evidence is?
Latent evidence is something that is not visible to the eye. It has to be processed in order to see it. A prime example of that would be a fingerprint, a shoe print. So it has to be processed with a chemical, and the chemical depends on the surface that it's on in order to see it. So it's invisible is what it means.
And how do you go about determining where latent evidence may be in a crime scene?
You go by you think about where someone would have touched in order to, go through the house or to do certain things. So for instance, in a doorway, you would process the door frame, the door handles, the door itself, because all of those surfaces could be touched in order to open that door.
And in terms of fingerprints, during the course of your training and experience, have you found there are certain conditions that are more conducive to others in terms of whether a fingerprint is left on an item?
Yes. Unlike TV, fingerprints aren't always found just because something was touched. The environment, the surface, whether or not the person, was sweating, were their hands dirty, a lot of factors go into whether or not there's actually a fingerprint that can be recovered.
How about whether or not someone was wearing gloves? Would that be a factor?
That will, in most cases, prevent a fingerprint from being put onto a surface. And in some cases, if it's a cloth glove, it could leave a cloth impression. Latex gloves have a certain type of impression that they leave. So, and those also can be latent.
You've mentioned shoe impressions a couple times during the course of our conversation here. What are shoe impressions?
A shoe impression is similar to a fingerprint, but it's left behind by the shoe as someone walks through an area, and essentially, as people walk, the soles of their shoes collect dirt or oils, and when they then walk on a surface, an imprint of their shoe tread is left behind.
In a homicide scene, I would expect that you would find blood or what appears to be blood in a homicide scene. How do you go about determining whether something is blood in a homicide scene?
We use a presumptive test, phenolphthalein, and we will swab. If something is suspected to be blood, we will take a swab of it and then test it with phenolphthalein. And if it has a positive reaction, so if it turns pink, then that is a positive reaction for the presence of blood. And then at later date, it has to be sent out for a confirmatory test.
And phenolphthalein, is that a chemical that you use?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. All right, Agent Gold, I want to now turn your attention directly to this crime scene. Thank you for kind of walking us through the background of what you do. But turning directly to the crime scene itself, you mentioned as part of your duties is the first thing you do is take photographs. Did you take photographs at this scene?
Yes, I did.
And approximately how many photographs did you take of this homicide scene?
I don't know a lot. I mean, if I had to guess, it seemed like maybe 800, but I don't really know for sure.
And when you're going through and taking photographs of this scene, is anyone with you?
Usually, yes. We try to have the video kind of follow the same order as the photographs. So a lot of times, whoever is taking the videotape will also walk through with you while you're doing the photos.
And would that, again, have been Agent Galloway at this scene?
Yes, it would have.
If I may approach the witness, Ron.
Yes, sir.
The 81. I'm going to start with the exterior of the building and show you State's Exhibit 81. If you may identify that.
That is the front door to the apartment.
Does it fairly and accurately represent the front door of the apartment?
Yes, it does.
Your Honor, this time I would ask to introduce 81 into evidence and publish to the members of the jury using the screen.
Any objection? It's allowed for illustrative purposes.
And Your Honor, just for the record, I am going to ask to publish each of these photos as we move forward. Defense counsel's been previously provided all these photographs, so they will all be for illustrative purposes.
All right, so you'll need to move them into evidence, but unless I hear otherwise, I'm going to allow publication and admission for. All right.
So I just wanted to say that now, because I thought that might be a helpful part of the process.
All right, very good. That'll be fine. Go ahead then.
Thank you.
Except for the ones that were previously raised and the court's aware of.
Right, just note your objection when they're moved for introduction.
And I believe I can give you a forecast of when that will occur. State's Exhibit 81, do you recognize that document, ma'am?
Yes, I do.
What is that document?
That is the front entry door to the apartment.
Okay. There appears to be a wreath on the front door of that apartment. Was that wreath there when you first began to process this scene on that morning?
Yes, it was.
Did you change that wreath in any way?
No, I did not.
At this point, I'm going to hand you what is now being marked for identification purposes, State's Exhibits 81, 82, 83, 84. I'm sorry. Let's start with 82. Change this one to 85. 86. 87. 88. 89. 90. And 91. And Agent Gold, what I intend to do with your testimony here is just kind of walk you through the apartment. So I'm going to hand you this specific group of photographs, and take a look at these photographs and tell me if they represent a fair and accurate representation of a couple areas of the apartment.
Yes, they do.
What areas of the apartment are represented in State's Exhibits 82 through 91?
The kitchen, the breakfast dining area, I guess you would call it, and the living room.
And these photographs fairly and accurately represent those areas prior to any processing that you may have performed?
Yes, well, some photos have markers in them,
Okay.
so that has been done in some of these photos.
And when you say markers, what do you mean by markers?
The yellow evidence markers that we place to identify certain items of evidence.
So, for example, if you find a purse lying on the table, then you may put an evidence marker beside it.
That's correct.
Your Honor, at this time I would ask to introduce 82 through 91 for illustrative purposes and publish.
Allowed.
Right. And permission for Agent Gold to stand up here.
Yes.
And I'll join her over there as well. State's Exhibit 82, excuse me, Agent Gold. Can you tell the members of the jury what you see there?
That is the view of the kitchen. This is the little breakfast dinette area. And you're looking at it as you had just walked in from the front entry door, and we're standing in like a little foyer.
If we can go to State's Exhibit number 83.
And that's another photograph of the table with the purse and items from the purse and a printer and that. That's right there in the little dining area.
You mentioned a purse. Can you describe that purse for us?
It's a white leather type purse with brown handles.
And is that the area in which you found the purse when you began to process the scene that morning?
Yes, it is.
State's Exhibit number 83.
84, and that's a 84.
Okay, I'll change that to 184. That's the one I got out of order.
Okay.
This would be State's Exhibit number 84. What do you see there?
Describe it. That's a mid-range photograph of the white purse with the yellow evidence marker placed beside it.
And why do you place evidence markers beside items there, Agent Gold?
A lot of times they represent evidence that we will be collecting, items that we find of importance. And it's a way to identify the evidence also in the reports, in the sketches, and when you do the sketch, you can put the item numbers throughout it and see where everything is in relation to each other.
Agent Gold, I'm going to hand you now what has been marked for identification purposes. The State's Exhibit 92. If you'll take a look at this bag and tell me if you recognize just what the bag is at this point.
This is the bag containing item 1, the white and color purse.
How can you tell that, Agent Gold, in terms of, are there any specific identifying markers or indications on this bag that lead you to believe that it corresponds to State's Exhibit 84?
This white label here has the case information, the date, the victim's name, the item number, and a description of the item inside the bag. And then on this side where it's been taped, those are my initials and the date that I sealed the bag.
Okay, and you say that bag is sealed. In what manner is that bag sealed?
With tape.
Okay, and you said your initials are on the bag. Why do you put your initials on the bag?
It's just a measure of security so that if someone ripped the tape off or cut the bag, you would see the disturbance and the writing on top of the tape.
And when an item such as the purse is taken, I guess, into custody for your purposes, where does that item go? Where do you take it?
When I take it back to the lab?
Yes, ma'am.
It will go into an evidence locker until if further evidence processing has to be done on it back in the lab. Once it's completely done, it is then submitted to our evidence unit, I guess, and then they submit it to a Raleigh Police Department.
Agent Gold, this bag, can you tell by looking at this bag if any further processing has been done on the bag besides yourself after it was collected?
Yes, it's been opened down here, and then someone resealed it with their initials and the date that they resealed it.
I'm going to hand you hand you some scissors, and if you will open State's Exhibit 92. Yes, ma'am. If you'll remove the contents of State's Exhibit 92. Want to label that on. As State's Exhibit 92A, and you recognize what State's Exhibit 92A is.
It's the white purse.
And does that white purse appear to be in the same or substantially same condition as when you collected it back on May 14th of 2013?
Yes, it does.
Can you tell, you mentioned there was some processing that was done to this item after it was collected. Can you describe that processing for the members of the jury?
Well, I know that I photographed it. Here you can see a small scale and a circle and marker. That's where I believe blood was swabbed from here and then tested. And I don't know what else was done with it by anyone else.
But at a later date, you recall, excuse me, swabbing this item for blood evidence.
Yes, I did.
Your Honor, this time I would ask to introduce State's Exhibit 92 and 92A into evidence.
Any objection? They are allowed.
Thank you. Proceed on to State's Exhibit number 86. What do you see there, Agent Gold?
That's a photograph showing part of the kitchen and the living room. This hallway leads to the master bedroom, and you can see that the photograph was taken standing kind of near the table that was there in the dining area.
So this chair here that we see kind of in the foreground, that's where the purse would have been.
Yeah, that's actually the corner of the purse right there, I think.
In documenting this scene, Agent Gold, any kind of disturbance that you saw in the kitchen area that you made note of?
There was a plastic bin containing vitamins and prescription bottles put on the kitchen counter, and then it seemed as though the contents of the purse were on top of the kitchen table.
So the purse that we saw earlier, it looked like it had been dumped out or rummaged through in some way?
It appeared that way.
State's Exhibit number 87. What do you see there?
That's looking into the kitchen, standing right in front of here, and then that's the plastic bin that I was just speaking of.
State's Exhibit 88.
That's the living room, standing in front of that island.
Any disturbance here in this area that you noticed, Agent Gold?
No, not at first. This is the rear sliding glass door that leads to the exterior deck right there.
At a later point, we'll talk about that, but at some point, did you process that patio or balcony door?
Yes, I did.
State's Exhibit number 89.
That is a photograph showing the corner of the living room and the kitchen, and then the doorway that leads to the master bedroom and master bathroom.
State's Exhibit 90.
That's, again, a photograph of the living room, and then you can see partially into the master bedroom right there.
So from this angle, are you essentially standing in that kitchen area that we've been talking about?
Yeah, right in the corner there.
In State's Exhibit 91.
And that's the plastic bin with the vitamin bottles and the prescription bottles that was open in the kitchen.
The State's Exhibit 91, in terms of the pill bottles, is that the exact condition that you found found those pill bottles in?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so there weren't pill bottles all around the island or on the countertop here?
No.
And for the record, this will be at the point where I believe some of the photographs that have previously been subjects of hearing two will be introduced.
And we would, sorry, we would review all the objections we made at the time of the initial public hearing for those to be.
All right, those objections are overruled.
Agent Gold, I'm going to show you what is now being marked for identification purposes of State's Exhibit 93, 94, 95, 96, 97, 98, 99, 100, 101, 102, 103, 104, 105, and 106. Agent Gold, I will ask that you take a look at that group of photographs. Tell me if you recognize what those group of photographs depict.
These photographs were all taken in the master bedroom, and they all depict the victim.
Do those photographs fairly and accurately represent the way that Miss Melissa Huggins-Jones looked when you began processing that scene that morning?
Yes, it does.
Any changes or alterations to those photographs?
No.
And to be clear, was Miss Huggins-Jones later removed from that bedroom and further processing was done?
Yes, that's correct.
Your Honor, at this time I would ask to introduce these State's Exhibits numbered 93 through 106 for illustrative purposes.
Previous objections are noted and overruled. They are allowed for illustrative purposes.
I may have just a moment. Start with State's Exhibit number 93. Can you describe what you see there for us?
This is a photograph taken in the master bedroom, standing at the foot of the bed, looking at the bed.
State's Exhibit number 94.
This is towards the right corner of the bed, is where the photograph has been taken from.
And this pillow that you see here that is on top of Miss Huggins-Jones, is that the exact condition in which you found that pillow when you arrived?
Yes, it is.
State's Exhibit number 95. What do you see there?
That is blood on the pillow. We've taken the pillow off, and that was the blood on the underside of the pillow that was on top of her.
State's Exhibit number 96.
That is the same pillow, I believe.
Is that the same side or flipped over?
Flipped over.
So both sides of the pillow had blood on it, if you recall?
I don't recall.
Okay. State's Exhibit number 97.
That's the photograph. That's a phone charger that was plugged into the wall behind the headboard, and the cord is coming up over the mattress, and that's where it stops.
To be clear, Agent Gold, at any point when you were doing your processing of this scene, did you find an iPhone plugged into that charger?
No, we did not.
In processing the scene, did you find an iPhone anywhere about the bedroom area of the victim?
No, we did not.
State's Exhibit number 98.
That is essentially a mid-range photograph of Miss Huggins-Jones.
You mentioned the iPhone cord earlier. Is that iPhone cord still present there in that scene?
That's the same cord, yes.
I want to talk to you a little bit about this area of the red area around Miss Huggins-Jones. What did that appear to be to you, ma'am?
That is all blood.
Now, there seems to be different shades of blood here on this photograph. Can you describe for the members of the jury what the condition of that blood was when you were examining the scene?
I would say it was still on the outer perimeter here. It was still damp, and the best way I can describe this area, it was still sticky to the touch, so it wasn't completely dry.
When you were examining the scene, if you'd had latex gloves on, such as we have on here now, if you'd touched that area, what would it have left an impression on your gloves?
I would say, yes, it would have. Yeah, it would have had transfer onto my gloves.
So even on this outer area here, it was still damp?
Possibly, but definitely from here on in.
State's Exhibit number 99.
That is a close-up photo.
Specifically in regards to Ms. Huggins-Jones' mouth, what item or scene were you depicting there? Or what part of her body were you taking a picture of there, I should ask?
Her face.
Okay. And did you note anything about her mouth when you took this photograph?
It appeared that several teeth had been knocked out, and the nose was severely lacerated.
State's Exhibit number 100.
And then that's a side view, obviously, of the photo with additional injuries here.
If you can describe those injuries for the members of the jury, what did you see? What did you document?
They appeared to be stab wounds of some type. The medical examiner would be able to give a better description than I.
But you documented these wounds as you saw them there that day?
That's correct.
And does it appear that there are wounds here near her neck area and her cheek area and all about her face?
Yes, sir.
You mentioned the nose, the slicing of the nose earlier. Is that also depicted in State's Exhibit 100?
Yes, sir. You can slightly see it in here.
And again, from this angle, can you see that she is missing teeth?
Yes.
State's Exhibit number 101. What do you see there?
That is a photograph of her torso area, and you can see there's blood here on her arms and here on the shirt, and a slight bit of lividity there on the arm.
What do you mean by lividity?
Once your heart stops beating, the force of gravity causes blood to go to the lowest points of your body, and what that is that's lividity, and it'll cause this red coloring. It's a reddish purple.
This black area on the, I guess if I'm facing the photograph, the left side of this photograph, what is that black area?
That's the body bag.
And how did the body bag get there?
There's a transport comes to the scene once we are ready for them, and they bring that with them, and they will then take her to the medical examiner's office inside the body bag.
How is the medical examiner's office notified that you have a person that's ready for transport?
The original responding agency will contact the medical examiner.
Is there a specific name for the medical examiner transport team?
WC7.
I'm sorry.
WC7.
This area between Miss Huggins-Jones, where she has her shirt pulled up, and the body bag, what item do you see there?
Right here is a tooth. A little white spot right there.
And when you first began examining the scene and Miss Huggins-Jones' body, did you see that tooth initially?
I don't believe so. I believe it was after we started getting closer.
At some point, she had to be rolled into the body bag, is that right?
That's correct, yes.
And is
Because we
that-
examined both the front and the back of the decedent.
And at the point where she had to be lifted up to examine her back, is that when the tooth became noticeable?
Yes, sir.
And then State's Exhibit number 102.
That's a photograph of her back, and you can see that there's blood, blood on her, and then a little bit more of the lividity. The white marks are from where the sheet was underneath of her, which then it has to do with gravity pulling the blood to the lowest spots. Again, it's the lividity.
This shirt here that's on, now that we're looking at Miss Huggins-Jones' back, was that shirt still wet at that time?
I believe so. I can't say for certain, but I believe it was in this area up by her neck. I think so.
State's Exhibits number 103.
That's a closer photograph of the tooth that was on her side, up by her side.
And State's Exhibit number 104.
Another photograph of the tooth.
Red area, that's her shirt.
Yes, sir.
And again, the black is the body bag that you described earlier.
Yes, sir.
Now, Miss Agent Gold, when you do a photograph or when you're photographing a scene, do you sometimes attempt to take aerial photographs of or overhead photographs of a scene?
Yes, we do.
And in this case, did you and other agents take overhead photographs of Miss Huggins-Jones' body?
Yes, we did.
State's Exhibit number 105.
And that's a photograph from directly above her, looking down, before she was moved, before the pillow was moved.
This area that you described earlier, Agent Gold, in terms of the pillow, there's now an evidence marker on that pillow. Why'd you put an evidence marker on that pillow?
It was of value to us because it was over top of her, and we felt that obviously it had to be placed there by someone, and so to us it was an important piece of evidence, and the marker 18 indicates that, and that we'll be collecting it, and it will then be item number 18.
Finally, State's Exhibit number 106. What do you see there?
That's another overhead photograph, and this is another pillow that was over on the side of the bed. And then this is after this pillow has been removed from the body.
And is that the condition in which you, Ms. Huggins-Jones was in prior to her being transported to the medical examiner's office?
Yes, it is.
Thank you, Agent Hill. Well, Agent Gold, I want to walk you through the scene a little bit more. I'm going to mark for identification purposes now 107.
Right. All right, we're going to take a break. Let's just go ahead and recess for lunch, ladies and gentlemen, and ask you to come back at 2 o'clock. While you're on lunch, please recall all the rules and instructions I've given you. Leave your notepads in the chair, and if you'll gather in the deliberation room at 2 o'clock. Everyone else, please remain seated. So Jerry, are there any matters that we need to take up before we recess?
No, sir.
All right, we'll be in recess until 2 o'clock.